not all parts of the Roman army operated in plain sight like the legions. Outside of Rome's frontiers, elite units moved like ghosts through hostile territory, ready to strike when they were least expected.
Although they leave few footprints in the historical record, the Romans employed a variety of groups outside the mainstream military to gain an edge over their opponents. Some specialised in covert intelligence gathering, others were elite scouts and pathfinders. The very best were tasked with politically sensitive and highly dangerous missions, rescuing hostages, for example, or assassinating enemy leaders. The Romans never used terms like special forces, but these ancient soldiers would be selected on ability, were trained in unconventional warfare, and would need the mental resilience to survive unsupported in the most challenging environments, much like their modern counterparts. In this episode, I've returned to Park in the past, where meticulous research is being used to recreate a 1st century landscape, to begin my training as a Roman special operative. Under instruction from historian Dr. Simon Elliott, I'll be sent into hostile terrain with Deva Victrix, hunted relentlessly by the Worcestershire cavalry. Using a range of contemporary sources and a little hands-on experience, we'll try to piece together the world of the Roman Special Forces from the perspective of the ordinary soldiers. I'll discover how subtlety was a crucial asset for Roman spies.
What are you doing, mate?
What special operations looked like 2,000 years ago.
The Romans would have used Exploratores, their special forces, who would penetrate really deep behind enemy lines.
How challenging it was to move unseen through the ancient wilderness. And just how likely it was that you'd make it out alive. Welcome to Survive History, guys. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Throughout their history, the Romans relied on a reputation for military prowess to maintain dominance over vast swathes of territory. Through all levels of Roman society, no traits were more highly prized than courage and skill at arms. This was especially true during the Republic, when Rome's highest political office holders, the consuls, were also expected to lead the army in battle. In many ways, the macho image they sought to portray was at odds with the stealth and subterfuge required for effective spying and scouting. Consequently, we have only patchy evidence for intelligence gathering and special operations during this period. But as the Republican system began to strain under the weight of larger-than-life populists like Julius Caesar, and eventually collapsed into civil war, leaders became less precious about using devious tactics to defeat their rivals. Warring dynasts often turned to trusted and capable soldiers to do their dirty work, realizing the value of insider information or a well-placed blade in the dark. During the imperial era, the use of secret agents and special forces would soon proliferate, but this new phase of history began with a real catastrophe for the Roman military. Just before I explain why the Romans needed to up their security game, it's time you thought about yours. Sure, you're probably safe from roving barbarian hordes, but when you're online, you still need to be prepared to fend off attacks. That's why this video is sponsored by NordVPN. It's basically like having your own Praetorian Guard with you when you surf the internet, but one that's loyal and reliable and isn't going to try and usurp you. Threat Protection Pro shields you against malware, phishing, scams, and pretty much every other kind of online threat. It even stops those incredibly annoying browser pop-ups that seem impossible to get rid of. A NordVPN isn't just defensive, its dark web monitor is out there working for you in the shadowy corners of the online world, keeping an eye on hacker hangouts so it can alert you if your data has been compromised. At Survive History, we use NordVPN because the team stores so much stuff online, and we need to know that our files and passwords are secure. Nord's password locker and encrypted cloud storage make that really simple, and you can get both Nord Pass and Nord Locker as part of a discounted premium package. If you sign up using nordvpn.com/survivehistory, which is on the screen now, you can get their 2-year plan plus 4 months extra cover. You'll be protecting yourself, you'll be supporting our channel, and if you're not totally happy, Nord offers a 30-day money-back guarantee. And of course, NordVPN is still a VPN, so if you want to check out a show on your favourite streaming service and it's not available in your region, you can simply change your location to gain access, all while staying completely safe. Do yourself a big favour and click the link in the description below to sign up. Now, back to the Roman frontier.
Failures in strategic intelligence had led to one of Rome's greatest military disasters. In AD 9, the Roman general Varus had led 3 legions and auxiliaries north of the Roman frontier without properly scouting the terrain. They went straight into an ambush and were wiped out nearly to a man. The Romans soon realised that they needed to stay one step ahead of their enemy's intentions.
The defeat in Teutoburg Forest brought home a terrifying truth. The mighty legions, able to match anyone in a fair fight, could be undone by cunning and deception if they didn't have an accurate picture of the battlefield. It was clear that to prevent such a crisis in the future, Rome's military machine would need eyes and ears everywhere. It would need a long reach too, to disrupt the enemy's plans long before they were acted on. After a tiring ride to the frontier, I'd been ordered to present myself at a remote auxiliary fort to meet my new commander, who just so happens to be the world's leading expert on Roman special forces.
Oi! Legionary! Get back to work!
Ah, Simon, I think I found our commander.
How you doing, Louis?
I'm good. Now, we're talking about Roman special forces today, but first of all, I think we've got to address this huge Principia building in the background, right? It's under construction. What's one of these for?
So the Principia is basically the centre of the fort. So this is either a marching camp or a permanent fort developed from a marching camp. You can see it's got the ditch and bank, it's got a palisade on top, etc. Caltrop defences on the outside. But inside a Roman marching camp or even a temporary fort, the layout will be exactly the same as any Roman full-fat legionary fortress. So you'd have your barrack buildings, you'd have your praetorium where the commander lived, where I'd live, and then in the centre it's the HQ, the headquarters, and that's called the Principia. So here you have the Principia, where this military unit is administered from.
Impressive building, right? And in a fort like this, you would have lots of specialists. You know, people who actually chose the site of the fort would be specialists, right? What kind of roles would they be playing on a day-to-day basis here?
So let's talk about a legion as an example. So a Roman legion of the Principate period, the first half of the Roman Empire, is 5,500 men. All of them fighting legionaries, all of them in the kit, all with the scutum, all with the gladius, all with a pilum, etc., all with a Gallic helmet. But of those 5,500, 1,200 had an additional task. There were specialists. So they could be craftsmen of any kind, carpenters, stonemasons, tile makers, fletchers, making ballistas, keeping the Legion in the field basically. So the Legion didn't need to have a long sort of field train, it was a very mobile unit. So you had those specialists within the Legion, and then also within the Legion you have specialist pioneers as well. So when the legionary spearhead is penetrating enemy territory, it's the pioneers scouted out where the marching camp was going to be for the night. So you've got specialists doing stuff and specialists as pioneers in the Legion itself.
It certainly paid to have a trade in the Roman military. The so-called immunes were quite literally immune from the worst jobs around the camp and received higher wages.
So perhaps if you were in a fort like this, you might want to be one of those specialists, right? To avoid the drudgery, digging latrines, that kind of thing. But the specialists, they're not quite what we would call today special forces, are they?
No, absolutely not. So in the modern world, special forces are seen by sort of foreign policymakers or military leaders as a get out of jail free card. You've got a problem, you don't want to spend a lot of money, you don't want to lose a lot of lives, so you use special forces. But in actual fact, special forces are far different from that, and they are a very elite way of practicing foreign policy or military activity. To be a member of the special forces, you have to be selected because you're exceptionally good at your job. You are trained to operate out of the normal constraints of a military unit. You are trained to operate independently in enemy territory with your given task, crucially without an umbilical going back to whoever's giving the orders. So you're given the job and you get on with it. And finally, you can be deniable as well. So you put those things together, and that is what a special forces unit is in the modern world. So the skill here, when we're talking about special forces in the past in the Roman world, is looking how the Romans operated, and can we say any of their military units were what we would call today special forces.
So where might the Romans be looking to fill such roles? And how high was the bar for entry?
Again, when we talk about special forces today, we might focus on the selection process. When you think about the SAS, for example, we know that these guys have to volunteer to go through hell to actually become an operative. Is there a sense of that happening in the Roman world, or are these skills already existing and they're being picked for them?
Absolutely. So remember, the Roman military is a two-tier system in the Principate phase of empire. You have the Roman legionary, who is the elite warrior of the ancient world, certainly as a line of battle troop, but also you have the auxiliaries as well, and the auxiliaries are often thought of as being lesser troops, but they're recruited in groups from specific areas. So I see you're dressed as a Thracian auxiliary today, Louis, looking very resplendent. You could be as good a soldier as a legionary in a given environment. Okay, so if you're operating particularly along the Danube frontier, you're going to certainly be more comfortable operating there than if you were a legionary from Legio 9 Hispana, who's been recruited from Spain or from North Africa. And when you come to the elite troops in the Roman Empire, if we can call them special forces, then they would certainly come from everywhere across the Roman military. They could come from legionaries, they could come from auxiliaries, they could come from the marines or the sailors of the Roman regional fleets.
It seems it wasn't the reputation or prestige of your military unit that mattered when it came to selection, but your individual abilities and mental toughness.
So you're going to want people there who are quick on their feet, who can speak local languages, who know the local geography, who know the local native tribe makeups, etc. So you want people who are comfortable in the environment they're operating in, because remember, if we declare that they are special forces, having considered them, they're on their own. What you're looking for are people, warriors who have a local skill set, but also remember a mindset as well. Because the person that's being recruited is already the elite warrior of the ancient world if he's a Roman legionary, or if he's from a really, really top-end auxiliary unit. So to go the step above, as we would say, going from, say, the Paras or the Marines, or the mainstream British military into the SAS, to go that step above, you have to have the mindset to do it as well. It's all about the mindset, the ability to get the job done.
Okay, Simon, well, I'm going to try and find out today if I've got the mindset to be in the Roman Special Forces. I think shortly we're actually going to be heading out into the wilderness, aren't we?
Well, we are, but firstly, I've got to be sure that you do have the mindset, but more importantly, the skills to be the equivalent of a Roman Special Forces operative. So I think you need to actually go and learn one or two things first. So off you go.
Got it. Okay, I'll be back soon.
Yeah.
Before I got too close to any murderous barbarians, I needed to test myself against some softer targets in and around the fort. Intelligence gathering for the Roman state involved plenty of snooping on your fellow citizens and soldiers to sniff out disloyalty. It was the Emperor Domitian, one of Rome's most paranoid rulers, who first officially recognised an imperial secret service at the end of the 1st century AD.
Surprisingly, the first official secret agents in the Roman world were recruited from logistics specialists involved in the supply of grain. They were perfectly placed to pick up information and gossip from a vast range of contacts. So, what are you guys chatting about?
The Frumentarii, as they were called, are recorded carrying out a variety of tasks, from arresting provincials and confiscating property, to spying on senators and occasionally murdering them. They acted as couriers for important messages, and are even found based in prisons, where they were perhaps used as interrogators. Overall, the job description seems to have been pretty flexible, and it's no surprise that they weren't very popular.
Other groups associated with Roman intelligence gathering are recorded attending negotiations with foreign entities in disguise to see the enemy up close and get a better sense of their strengths and weaknesses.
4 wagons. We'll go 4 wagons. Well, the wagon's going to be
What are you doing, mate?
Scipio, on such occasions, used to send in the company of his envoys certain expert observers and certain of his officers, looking mean and dirty fellows, disguised as they were in the habit of slaves, with the object of exploring and inspecting, undisturbed.
As we've seen, the stakes could be much higher when Rome was at war. The success or failure of a military campaign could hinge on up-to-date knowledge of the enemy's location, number, provisioning, and morale, not to mention terrain, topography, and distances from one place to another. This information could only be gained by sending specialist units into the unknown.
The name for one of these groups, Speculatores, came from the Latin word for watchtower, specula, and that reminds us of something important. When it came to surveillance of Rome's neighbours, there was no other option but to send people. Those selected for the task would need to survive outside the protection of Rome's frontiers.
Aren't you supposed to be with them?
Oh yeah.
The lands beyond Rome's control were known as Barbaricum, a dark, scary, and lawless expanse not touched by the light of civilization, at least as far as they were concerned. The Romans who regularly operated here are also shadowy figures. From the available evidence, it appears that the Speculatores were originally scouts and military spies. They worked alone or in small groups, often disguising themselves as merchants, refugees, or deserters to observe the enemy or infiltrate settlements.
Octavian also sent certain persons in the guise of traders into the enemy camp to mingle with the soldiers. to work upon the boldest of them and secretly distribute notices among the rank and file.
Although hard to distinguish from the Speculatores in some sources, we have more detailed knowledge of another group, the Exploratores. The Latin name isn't too hard to translate. Their job was to explore and investigate, but this time over much greater distances. These men needed to blend seamlessly with their environment, and while Exploratores weren't exclusively recruited from frontier populations, it's clear that many were, with native names and deities recorded on the few surviving tombstones. Organised into an irregular unit called a numeri, nominally under the command of a Roman officer, they would nevertheless have felt quite separate to the mainstream military. Evidence from Hadrian's Wall suggests they may have lived in their own distinct camps, and when they were deep in the wilderness, there would have been little contact with the main army.
Roman military commentators offer some practical advice for soldiers operating close to the enemy in hostile territory. They should pay close attention to landmarks to aid the mapping of routes, identify potential ambush sites, move quietly, and be very accurate with timings.
We might expect a typical patrol of Exploratores to be mounted, but evidence from military records shows that both cavalry and infantry were drafted in from auxiliary cohorts. It's therefore likely that scouting details were hand-picked based on the specific demands of the mission. A group may have included expert skirmishers, saboteurs, hunters, and bushcraftsmen, a blend of skills that would have allowed them to survive unaided in the wilderness for days or weeks at a time. When they did return to make contact with their superiors, the observations they provided could prove critical to the outcome of a battle.
Then came a threading of gloomy forests and a consultation on which of two roads to follow. The one short and usual, the other more difficult and unexplored, and therefore left unguarded by the enemy. The longer route was chosen, but otherwise all speed was made, for scouts had brought in news that that night was a German festival and would be celebrated with games and a solemn banquet.
Okay, Simon, so we've just spotted an enemy camp. The Exploratores, deep behind enemy lines, one of their key roles was to infiltrate, assess enemy camps, right, get in there, identify the best time to attack.
If you're a military force in the field, you're going to want intelligence of some sort, and if you're a legionary spearhead deep in enemy territory, you want to know what's in front of you. So the Romans would have used Exploratores, their special forces, who would penetrate really deep behind enemy lines in front of the legionary spearhead to work out what was going to happen and to advise the military unit behind them, legionaries, auxiliaries, on what the best route was and where the weak points in enemy defences were, and if they got the chance, they could even go for targeted assassinations.
Okay, and I think there are even examples where the Exploratores identified the enemy having religious festivals, that kind of thing, telling the legions when the best time to go in was.
Well, the beginning of that story actually is when the Exploratores failed. So that's the AD 9 Varian disaster when Varus took his 3 legions into the Teutoburg forest in Germany and they were wiped out. So clearly the special forces failed there, the Exploratores, but when the Romans had their campaigns of retribution, they worked really well. So there's one example when Germanicus was leading his troops to destroy one of the German tribes. They found out when a religious festival was, so they knew that the tribe would actually be off their guard, and that is when they struck.
Pretty smart. And it certainly didn't end there, right? They were involved in pretty daring missions that you know, almost have modern comparisons right throughout the Principate period.
Well, if you look at the campaigns of Agricola, who's the only Roman, I think, who could claim to have conquered the whole of the mainland of Britain in his campaigns in the far north. There's an example in AD 82 when the 9th Legion was almost wiped out by an ambush. Wasn't the event where it disappears, but it was almost wiped out. And the references we have say that it was saved by the intervention of the Exploratores, who found a route through to them so that the Roman reserves who were coming up to relieve them got there on time and saved them. That's a great example. There's the targeted assassination of Decebalus, who was the king of the Dacians when Trajan was conquering the Dacians at the beginning of the 2nd century AD.
In fact, this incident gives us a rare glimpse at the story of an individual scout. Tiberius Claudius Maximus was a decorated cavalry trooper from northern Greece, serving with the Exploratores during the latter stages of the Dacian War. During the final pursuit of Decebalus, a scene depicted on Trajan's column, it was Maximus who supposedly cornered the Dacian leader on a mountainside, cutting off his head and later presenting it to the emperor. But an earlier mission was arguably even more audacious: a hostage rescue of Hollywood proportions.
The best example I can give you, though, in actual fact, is for a British queen, Cartimandua, who was the queen of the Brigantes, and under the governor Balanus, after AD 69, when he was campaigning in the far north, he got word that she'd been captured in a rebellion led by her ex-husband, Venutius. He ordered a force north, a flying column. And if you look at the description of that campaign, to me, it's basically a special operation. So you might say the auxiliary cavalry are doing it. I don't think so at all. I think there are Exploratores going deep behind enemy lines. I mean, the capital of the Brigantes was in Stanek, which is near Darlington. So it's far north of the Roman frontier at the time. So these are guys operating far north of the Roman frontier. I think that is a special forces campaign.
So they're not only infiltrating deep into enemy territory. In that case, they've got to get someone all the way out as well. So they've got to know their business, right?
And they did. They did. It was highly successful. However, the Romans didn't forget the fact that the Brigantes had caused them trouble. So when you get the governor Cerealis coming in, he's given the orders, go and take out the Brigantes. And that's the campaign which drives the Roman frontier up to what later became the line of Hadrian's Wall on the sideway Firth to the Tyne.
So the rescue of Cartimandua, we're looking at an enemy settlement where they're not bulldozing their way through the defences.
Which is what they'd normally do.
Which is what they'd normally do, but they're trying to find a way in stealthily, presumably, to extricate a specific high-ranking target.
Louis, this is a deep surgical penetration into enemy territory. The fact they were able to get to her and rescue her in the first place means they actually did it undetected. Okay, so that's astonishing in its own right. And then they repeated it by getting her out again. Here's the interesting thing though, although we do know that she was rescued and taken to Roman territory, she's never written about again in the Roman primary sources.
Maybe a bit too troublesome then.
Well, you could say that, Louis, but I couldn't possibly comment. Now, Louis, here we have a native settlement, okay, and I've received word that there is a native queen who's been captured and has been held there. So we need to rescue her. But first, you need to scout the place out to get the intelligence so you know where your attack's going to go in. So could you now go and scout it, please?
Cool. Understood. On my way.
Fires could be discerned from the camp of the Germans, and the scouts, who ventured closer up, came in with the news that they could hear the neigh of horses and the murmur of a vast and tumultuous array.
Roman military treatises specifically advised that dangerous reconnaissance missions be carried out at night, but our tight filming schedule meant there was no time to waste. To give our assault any chance of success, it was crucial to see what would be waiting for us inside the settlement. Being spotted now would probably mean torture and almost certain death. We're not sure exactly how the Exploratores reported their findings to Roman commanders, or how often they were expected to make contact. It all likely depended on what was most practical at the time. The Roman military writer Vegetius refers to generals receiving reports that were illustrated with hand-drawn maps, allowing them to choose the best route of advance. Archaeology also offers us tantalising clues. This damaged writing tablet unearthed at Vindolanda, a fort on Hadrian's Wall, just might preserve part of an intelligence report written by a scout who had ventured into the wilds of modern Scotland. The Britons are unprotected by armour. There are very many cavalry. The cavalry do not use swords, nor do the wretched little Britons mount in order to throw javelins. The tablet could be many other things, of course, part of a written handover from one Roman officer to another perhaps. The use of the derogatory term Britunculi suggests the author wasn't local, but that doesn't necessarily discount the Exploratores. In any case, my report had been handed in and analysed. The decision had been made that we were going in.
She asked the Romans for protection, and in fact some companies of our infantry and cavalry, after meeting with indifferent success in a number of engagements, finally succeeded in rescuing the Queen from danger.
With our hostage rescued and handed over to the legionaries, it was now our job to guide the whole Roman task force back to base. The trouble was, our foes appear to have respawned, and were now attempting to cut off our withdrawal.
Roman special forces weren't only good at infiltrating enemy territory, they were relied on by commanders to get them out of sticky situations. In 57 BC, Julius Caesar used his Speculatores to get his army out of an encirclement placed on it by a huge band of Nervii tribesmen. Their ability as Pathfinders was crucial. It's this way, guys. No, it's this way. No.
Evidence from a recently discovered battlefield site in northern Germany suggests that the Emperor Maximinus Thrax encountered a similar problem when returning from campaign in the years 235 to 6. Maximinus had apparently been successful in taking on the powerful Germanic tribes, leading his army more than 100 miles north of the imperial frontier. It was a huge gamble that relied heavily on expert reconnaissance. On the return journey, his tired troops had to negotiate the narrow Harzhorn Pass, a perfect ambush spot. The Exploratores were again sent ahead to uncover what was lurking in the forested hills and report back.
The Germans had left the plains and treeless areas and were hiding in the forests. They remained in the woods and marshes so that the battle would have to take place where the thick screen of trees made the missiles and javelins of their enemies ineffectual, and where the depths of the marshes were dangerous to the Romans because of their unfamiliarity with the region.
Okay, so our final challenge is to make our escape back to friendly territory and avoid the barbarian cavalry.
We'd found the woods teeming with hostile tribesmen, but a scout's observations were only useful if they avoided capture. The ancient sources make clear that soldiers caught as spies were summarily executed in most cases, typically after they'd been forced to spill their own useful intelligence. Luckily, we'd managed to slip through the net, back to our own lines. Centuries after the disaster in Teutoburg Forest, the Romans had clearly learned their lesson. Maximinus's scouts located the Germanic army, and when battle was joined, the Romans had prepared by deploying dozens of artillery pieces. The Harzhorn battlefield was found littered with bolts fired from the Roman Scorpio and ballista. Maximinus's army forced its way through. Just as I was feeling relieved to have made it back to the safety of the fort, there were plenty of Roman scouts grateful to get home alive. Monuments set up by Exploratores to the genius of their unit, a kind of guardian spirit, have been found at several military sites. Often, the deities they offer thanks to are outside the traditional Roman pantheon, reinforcing the idea that these scouting units retained their native customs. I wanted to learn more about the men who were recruited into these roles and what made them suitable candidates for the Roman Special Forces.
Okay then, Thrax, we made it out of enemy territory alive, so cheers to that. We've been talking about Roman Special Forces today, but a lot of them are recruited from auxiliary units, right? Can you give us a sense of some of the groups that have been recruited from and what their military specialisms are?
Well, it all depends on what units you're talking about, really, and where they come from as well. So, give you a great example, you've got Germania and Gaul heavily recruited for their cavalry and their shock troops. You've got Syria, Crete, heavily recruited for their archers and their scouting capabilities, slingers, things like that. You've got Thrace, heavily recruited for skirmishers, cavalry, and for archers as well. And then you've got the lands of the Sarmatian, the horse people, so just cavalry are coming from them. So it depends on which units, where they come from, basically, and what their capabilities are. And then the commanders of the armies looking at these gentlemen and going, okay, that person's pretty good at that job. Let's have him for this role.
Yeah, so the Romans quite good at sort of picking other people's specialisms up, right? So, I mean, I can't help but notice, but we're in a very Eastern-style yurt here. So we're certainly in a fort on the western frontier, but auxiliaries brought over from further afield.
Yes, much further afield. So the year that we're in, this is what your Thracians and your Sarmatians would be living in. Because the idea of the auxiliaries is they are specialist soldiers being brought in for their skill sets, as we said before. And so it doesn't make sense for them to come here and then be given a load of equipment that they've never used before. It doesn't make sense. You're bringing them here because they're good at what they're doing. And what makes them good at their job? The kit they're using. So the reason why this yurt is here is because these boys were coming over with their own kit, their own camps, their own tents. They were self-sufficient, which is great for the Roman army. Low on cost. You don't have to pay for it. Maintenance. You don't have to worry about fixing it. These are two big important things for the army, because if you can rely on a unit to do its job and you don't have to pay and keep it up and fix it, that's great.
Although the ethnic makeup of auxiliary cohorts would change over time, as local recruits replaced original members, there would certainly have been a sense of community in auxiliary units. Documentary evidence from Egypt shows us that Thracian cavalrymen were banded together in remote desert outposts. It was in the Romans' interest that these men retained some of the comforts of their homeland, giving them something familiar to keep fighting for.
These people are trained from early childhood in these roles, in these jobs, because that's their societies, that's what they were. You know, if you were born into a warrior's family, you're going to be raised as a warrior. You're the next generation, so you're starting your training as early as 6 years old, learning how to fight, bow, spear, sling. And then for the cultures like the Thracians, the Gauls, the Germanics, the Sarmatians, you learn how to ride your horses as well. So from birth, you're trained, and what that gives you is an excellent soldier. Well, sorry, shouldn't say soldier. You should actually say warrior, because that's what they are. Their profession, their job is to fight, and they've been doing that since childhood. So what makes the legions great is that their way of fighting is so simple that anyone who joins it can pick it up like that. But even Rome understood we still need professional warriors. We still need people with that skill set. And you're only going to get that from these people who've been doing it since 6 years old.
So perhaps it's not surprising then that Roman special forces, guys who are obviously very tough, not only at fighting but at surviving behind enemy lines, they're going to be recruited from people who perhaps live in harsh environments and have harsh lifestyles.
Very much so. You look at the territories that the Romans are recruiting from. Give you an example. Let's take Thrace as an example. It's right on the border with the Dacians. Not an easy people, to try and fight against. Famous for, cutting legions in half with their famous weapon, the falx. So constant warfare, constantly fighting. And even Herodotus says that the Thracians, if they were to unite, they could have conquered the world. But they love fighting against each other. So even though these people had threats north and south of them, and they were fighting them, they were still fighting each other. So they were living in a constant warfare, which is why Britain is so dangerous as well, because they're constantly fighting. They hadn't become peaceful. But this is ideal for the Roman Empire, because what you're getting is the best warriors because of that constant fighting. These people are used to warfare. They know how to work in it, how to do the job, which is why when you have the wars against the Dacians, Trajan gets a lot of the British auxiliaries from here and moves them to Romania.
The martial skills that made these tribes useful allies also made them dangerous enemies. The Britons, Batavians and Thracians, relied on to fill the ranks of the Roman auxiliaries, also instigated some of the most dangerous revolts against the empire. Moving these warriors far from home and keeping them busy on the battlefield were the only ways to safely exploit their potential.
So tough soldiers, and we know that they were used for some pretty difficult missions. The Batavians, for example, weirdly had a reputation for being able to cross rivers in full armour, right? That kind of thing. Are there any other sort of daring exploits of auxiliaries that sort of stand out for you?
There's quite a few, really. You could take your pick. Let's use the Thracians, because that's what I represent, the Thracian cultures. During the civil wars with Mark Antony and Octavian against Brutus and things like that, Mark Antony's Thracian auxiliaries that he had employed to fight with him, they'd taken over the camp of Brutus. They were looting and going through all the stuff, legionaries and auxiliaries. And the Thracian king finds out that Brutus has run off into the hills. So despite all the loot and plunder, he handpicks a group of men and he goes, we're going after him. And he chases Brutus through the mountains. And it's Brutus, when he finally gets word of who's chasing him and finds out that his army's been defeated, instead of standing and fighting, he rather commits suicide. He's like, I'm not fighting these boys. But for me, that's a testimony to what was going after him. Because as a Roman, with still his men, he went, if those boys are after me, there's not a chance. And the fact is the Thracian king turned down loot because he knew the real prize was Brutus, and he went after him. You've got the Britons, who are recorded on Trajan's column, going against the Dacians with nothing more than trousers, bare chests, shield and a wooden club. Because at the end of the day, that's still going to kill you. And so that reputation of the auxiliaries is there. It shows the ferocity that they're able to do. And like you said, the Batavians with their skill set of being able to swim across rivers, it's all these things that makes Rome go, we like that. Can you come and fight for us, please? And that's what keeps it going.
So in summary, many of these groups would have provided men who were perfect candidates for sort of special forces recruitment.
Yeah, and what we have to understand as well, for special recruitment like the Exploratores and all the other special jobs, the auxiliaries would have been perfect, because it's back to what we were saying before, they're coming with their own equipment. Yes, you do have auxiliaries who have Roman equipment, and yes, you do have those units that kind of look like Romans, but most of the time they're coming as I am dressed. This is their own kit. It works, it functions. It's why Rome is hiring them, and it's why then when they're in the army, they're looking at these people and going, your man over there, he's pretty good at slinging. Want him for this patrol. Or he's pretty good at archery. I want him for this patrol.
Picking the right roles for the specific mission.
Yes.
Making sure the job gets done.
Exactly.
Cheers to that.
Cheers.
The Roman fort featured in this episode is the centrepiece of a unique heritage project called Britain's Big Fort Build. An exciting challenge to reconstruct an authentic, full-size auxiliary fort set within a rewilded ancient landscape. It's the first complete conquest period fort to be built in Britain for nearly 2,000 years, and you can visit for a great day out to see Roman life in action. Please help by donating to this amazing project using the link on the screen right now. While Roman special operations behind enemy lines were inherently dangerous, we should remember that not all scouting was high risk. Even along the frontiers, the Roman Empire did enjoy long periods of peace, when reconnaissance would have felt rather less pressing. During the early 3rd century, one Exploratores unit is even recorded carrying out repair work on a bathhouse in Waldern, Germany, under the direction of a Roman centurion. And there are still many questions about these ancient soldiers left to answer. We don't really know what they looked like, other than to say it probably wasn't very Roman. The few contemporary depictions show them sporting a variety of clothing styles and weaponry.
Just like today, special operations in the Roman world weren't widely publicised. And that makes the individuals who were involved in them elusive in the extreme. They leave few traces in the historical record. But we do get a sense from the limited evidence available, tombstones for example, that these soldiers were proud of their specialist roles. They were elite soldiers given the toughest assignments, where survival was far from guaranteed. Living for extended periods in hostile territory would have required immense resilience, not to mention advanced bushcraft skills. Capture was always a terrifying prospect that must have played on their minds. Ultimately, if they failed their mission, help probably wasn't coming. Their unit might even deny that they ever existed.
Thanks again to Park in the Past, Dr. Simon Elliott, Deva Victrix and the Worcestershire Cavalry for making this episode possible. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like and comment on this video, and if you want to support our work, buy us a coffee at the link on screen now.